He was hailed as a legend, a legal titan in front of the cameras, but off-screen, a storm was brewing. While millions saw Raymond Burr as the calm, commanding force behind Perry Mason, one man saw something entirely different. Not admiration. Not respect. But raw, burning resentment. For years, one of his closest co-stars kept quiet. Now, the truth is finally out, and it changes everything. Behind the courtroom drama, behind the network praise and golden reputation, was a private tension so bitter it left scars that never healed. What happened on that set wasn't just ego or rivalry, it was personal. And once you hear the real reason he despised Raymond Burr, you'll understand why the hate never faded, not even after the cameras stopped rolling. For years, the illusion was perfect. On screen, the performances felt authentic, the chemistry believable, and audiences saw only professionalism and poise. But behind the polished facade, a very different reality played out, one laced with quiet animosity, subtle tension, and a disdain that lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. Those closest to the set saw what fans couldn't, the cold glances, the silence between takes, and the unmistakable friction that couldn't be hidden forever. What could possibly fuel such long-held resentment? Was it a battle of egos? A clash of principles? Or something far more personal and cutting? This wasn't your typical Hollywood feud filled with headlines and drama, it was colder, deeper, more calculated. And once the truth is fully revealed, the reason becomes painfully clear. Raymond Burr, a man who once played villains with chilling ease, rose to become television's most trusted attorney, the face of justice in Perry Mason. But behind that transformation was a complicated man, a guarded life, and a series of decisions that left a trail of broken trust, including one co-star who never forgave him. Raymond William Stacey Burr was born on May 21, 1917, in the quiet town of New Westminster, British Columbia, a far cry from the Hollywood lights that would later frame his legacy. There were no headlines at his birth, no signs pointing to stardom. But even in those early years, something was stirring. Beneath the surface of a modest Canadian upbringing, the foundation was being laid for a man who would one day become one of television's most commanding presences. His voice, his stare, his gravitas, none of it was accidental. It was earned, crafted through years of dedication and quiet perseverance. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, Burr cut his teeth in the trenches of entertainment, not on movie sets, but on the stages and radio waves where true skill was tested. He mastered the art of timing, voice control, and emotional nuance. Every role, every line, every performance was a lesson. His ascent was not meteoric, but methodical, the mark of a man who knew that greatness wasn't given, it was built. Then, in 1946, he stepped in front of a film camera for the very first time in Without Reservations, and something shifted. The screen didn't just capture Burr, it listened to him. It followed him. And the industry began to take notice. Even though the movie wasn't great, it did pave the way for Hollywood. As soon as that happened, Burr started getting a lot of supporting parts, mostly in crime and film noir movies, where his strong presence and intense gaze made him a natural fit for scary characters. Hollywood saw something in Burr. He could play the bad guy, the heavy, or the man who stood just off-center in every scene. By stepping into those parts with skill, he made a place for himself that gave him steady work. Between 1947 and 1956, Burr kept getting noticed for how he played bad guys. He was able to show danger without using a lot of showmanship in movies like Raw Deal, 1948. Burr's bad guys were dark and silent, and they didn't even have to raise their voices to scare you. Then, in 1954, he played Lars Thorwald in Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, which became one of his most famous parts. It wasn't what Burr said that scared people as the accused murderer who lived across the courtyard. It was what he didn't say. His role in Rear Window was one of the best examples of how he could take charge of a story without being the main character. Even with these wins, Burr stayed mostly in the background in Hollywood. People respected him, but they didn't know his name yet. In 1957, CBS gave him the lead part in the new legal drama Perry Mason, which changed everything. The pick of cast surprised a lot of people. Following this, Burr had spent most of his screen time playing bad guys. Now he would be playing one of the most moral TV characters, a defense lawyer who is known for being smart and having a strong sense of right and wrong. It was a big change that would affect him for the rest of his life. Ray Burr was born to play Perry Mason. It was clear from the first show. He played the part with a seriousness that made it better, turning a courtroom routine into a must-see show. People were mesmerized by how Burr's steady, measured delivery helped Mason solve difficult cases, find the truth, and do what was right. It wasn't flashy or over-the-top how he played the part. A lot of thought went into it, and it was very real. The fans loved it right away, and Perry Mason became a huge hit. From supporting player to TV star, Burr had gone through a lot of changes by 1959. The Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series was given to him that year. The fact that his work was praised by both his friends and critics made it clear that it was not only well-liked. In 1961, 2 years later, he won the award again, making him even more famous as one of the best lead players on TV. These praises didn't just show how good Burr was as an actor, they also showed how people felt about him changing. He was no longer seen as the scary bad guy who hid in the dark. He was now the person who stood strong for justice. There were 9 seasons of Perry Mason. During that time, Burr became a common food in American homes. Millions of people watched him every week to see him solve the hardest legal problems and defend people who were wrongly accused. His work was steady, stable, and unwavering. What made Burr's Mason different was that he didn't use tricks. He kept his cool, carefully thought through his arguments, and always had one more fact that would change the whole case. There was more to it than just solving riddles. It was about getting people to believe in truth and justice again. Behind the scenes, Burr was known for how hard he worked at his job. Sometimes he worked long hours to make sure each show met his high standards. He almost never missed a day of filming. His co-stars and crew said he was serious and focused, and that he took his role as the lead very seriously. That hard work and discipline showed up on the screen, where his ability never wavered. Even as things started to change in TV, Burr stuck to what was right about the character and the show. But everything has to end. And Perry Mason ended its run in 1966, after 9 great years. For many actors, the end of such an important part may have been the high point of their careers. But Burr wasn't done yet. He changed his mind again, as he always does. This time, they were taking on a whole new role that would lead to more success. Even though that part of the story wasn't about Perry Mason, the base he built over the 9 seasons helped him move forward. The fact that he was known for being thoughtful and authoritative on TV became part of his memory. He made up a wife and child to hide who he really was. What makes Raymond Burr's otherwise impressive legacy more difficult to understand is the carefully woven web of personal lies he told his whole life, even as the truth slowly came out in the background. When Burr wasn't acting, his real life was full of contradictions and quiet lies. This was especially true when he played Perry Mason, who was always looking out for justice. One of the most important was a made-up personal past that was taken as true for many years. Burr says that he was married to a Scottish actress called Annette Sutherland in the past. He said that she had died in a terrible plane crash in 1943, and that this event had changed his private life forever. He also talked about his son Michael, who had died young from leukemia, which made the loss even worse. People said that these losses were the reason he never got married again and spent a lot of his adult life by himself. Fans and writers alike believed these heartbreaking stories for decades. They seemed to go with Burr's serious attitude and gave the man behind Perry Mason's calm, collected voice more emotional depth. The story painted a picture of a man who had been through a lot and loved deeply, but whose love was taken away too soon. In the setting of the time, the story was both sad and good. In doing so, it explained why Burr was alone and gave people something they could relate to and understand. Later, though, reporters and biographers found that none of these claims could be proven. In 1943, a woman named Annette Sutherland did not seem to have died in a plane crash. There were also no photos, marriage licenses, or other papers that would have shown she had ever lived. In the same way, there was no sign of a boy named Michael. Raymond Burr didn't have any proof that he had ever had a child. There were no death papers, medical records, school records, or anything else. The more the detectives looked, the more it became clear that these terrible events were probably made up. This news was shocking, but maybe not a surprise. Image control was important in Hollywood, especially in the middle of the 20th century. For actors like Burr, especially those with big TV parts that got a lot of attention, it was important to keep their personal lives in check so that they lived up to what people expected. In the case of Burr, there was even more pressure. In those days, being openly gay could ruin both your job and your personal life. He was a gay man who worked during that time. In a time when homophobia was common and morals were very strict, keeping up a public front was often the only way to stay employed. It's possible that Burr's choice to make up a wife and son wasn't just for the sake of lying. It was instead a planned and very personal way to protect themselves. He told a lie to avoid answering unwanted questions about his lack of a girlfriend and the unwanted attention that could have shown him up. It made a sympathetic picture of a man who had been through a terrible disaster, and not many people would question or challenge it. In this way, Burr was able to work in the public world while keeping his private life safe and undamaged. It is very important to understand this situation. In the 1950s and 1960s, it was hard for LGBTQ people, especially those who worked in show business. Being gay was frowned upon, and there was a real chance of a scandal. In an instant, careers could be ruined, identities could be ruined, and people could be put on a blacklist or be shunned by their peers. The stakes were especially high for an actor like Burr, who had just landed a new and well-known part on national TV. To keep his job and keep himself safe, he made up a sad, believable, and most importantly, unquestionable past. Even though this choice was reasonable, it has left behind a difficult legacy. On the one hand, it's sad to think that Burr had to hide so much of who he was. It was impossible to deny his skill, his presence, or his effect. But in order to be accepted, he had to hide an important part of who he was. His deeds, on the other hand, show what kind of world he lived in, not always how honest he was. It wasn't for fame or sympathy that the lies were told. They were about getting by. In a strange way, Burr spent most of his career playing people who were looking for justice and the truth. In his role as Perry Mason, he fought against lies, unfairness, and manipulation and always stood up for the harmless. The difference between the man he played and the person he was is hard to ignore. But maybe this difference is what makes Burr's story so deeply human. He wasn't intentionally trying to trick everyone. He was just trying to stay safe in a world that wouldn't accept him for who he really was. These new facts did not come to light during Burr's lifetime. In fact, the whole story didn't come out until after he died in 1993. Biographers and reporters then started to look into the holes in his stories and slowly put together a more true picture of his personal life. It was clear that Burr had been seeing guys for a long time, especially with actor Robert Bendites, who was his longtime partner. Burr never said they were dating in public, but the two were together all the time for more than 30 years. A lot of people know Bendites as Burr's life partner because she took over his wealth after he died. There were problems with how Hollywood kept casting Raymond Burr as bad guys. As we learn more about Raymond Burr's life and impact, it's clear that his personal story wasn't the only part of who he was that was shaped, or maybe not shaped, by public expectations and pressures from the business world. In fact, just like Burr carefully made up stories about a made-up wife and child to hide his private life, the entertainment industry helped shape a very specific image of him in the minds of people, one that didn't always show off his full acting skills. This brings us to an important but rarely talked about part of Burr's career, the long-standing criticism of how he cast actors in Hollywood. Many reviewers, fans, and historians have had strong opinions on this subject for many years. Was Raymond Burr ever really given the chance to show off all of his skills? Or did he get stuck too early in a narrow mold that was made by his looks, voice, and a studio system that valued consistency over potential? In the early years of his movie career, Burr was almost always cast as the bad guy. With his strong 6 feet 2 inches frame, deep, authoritative voice, and big, solid build, he was naturally a good fit for bad guy parts. His voice and body gave him a powerful presence that got people's attention right away, often without him having to say much. During the noir-heavy late 1940s and early 1950s, Hollywood wanted bad guys to be just that. Burr could make you feel scared with just a look, or he could be cruel in a quiet way that didn't need a lot of showmanship to be believable. He turned into someone your hero shouldn't cross. The evil businessman, the jealous husband, the murderer who doesn't feel bad about what he did. These traits were strengthened by movies like Raw Deal, 1948, Pitfall, 1948, and Rear Window, 1954. In Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, Burr played Lars Thorwald, a secretive and suspicious man who thinks James Stewart's character killed his wife. Even though Burr didn't say a word for most of the movie, every scene was scary, showing once again that he could build tension with almost no dialogue. His parts as bad guys worked well, stood out, and were praised by critics. It worked well at first, but over time it became a double-edged sword. He was too good at his job. It was like directors and producers couldn't see anything else. Like many others before him, he had been identified, put in a box, and TYP cast. Burr was angry about this for years. Even though he was thankful for the work, he started to dislike how small the images were. He wasn't just bad. He had played parts on stage before. He knew the depth, subtlety, and nuance of emotions. He wanted to play guys who were heroes, thinkers, and complicated, not just scary ones. But the business wasn't ready to think of him in a new way. Burr's image as a bad guy stuck like glue in a system that liked to stick with what worked. This is why Burr's role as Perry Mason in 1957 was such a big deal, both for his career and for his reputation. No one thought he would get that part. Burr wasn't even in the running when the search for an actor to play the famous defense lawyer started. He had to fight to get the part. When he finally got the part, some people wondered if people would believe that such a famous bad guy could be a good guy. But Burr showed those who didn't believe him wrong and then some. The TV show Perry Mason became a huge hit. Burr's performance was calm, smart, morally sound, and quietly fierce. He wasn't a threat anymore. His fans loved him because he fought for justice, stood up for the innocent, and looked for the truth. Burr got 2 Emmys for Best Lead Actor in a Drama Series over the course of the show's 9 seasons. He became so linked to the part that people often just called him Perry Mason, forgetting or not caring about the 10 years he had played bad guys. Burr's public image changed a lot because of this change. He was also able to show a wider range of emotions. Burr could be sharp and analytical as Mason, but he could also be kind and decent. His acts in court didn't depend on scariness or menace, but on intelligence, timing, and kindness. Television gave him the chance to use those more complex skills for the first time. It didn't end there. After the end of Perry Mason in 1966, Burr played a lead part again, this time as Robert T. Ironside in Ironside. The character, a former police officer who is paralyzed and still solves crimes from his wheelchair, gave Burr's acting more depth. He had to show that he was physically weak while still being mentally and emotionally strong. This show was groundbreaking in many ways. A person with a disability was shown to be strong, capable, and important to the story. It also helped Burr's image as a dynamic and reliable lead actor. Again, TV gave him the chance to play characters with a lot of depth that the movie business had been denying him for a long time. Relationship that has been kept secret for 30 years. Raymond Burr went from playing a typical bad guy to becoming a famous legal hero. This showed how versatile and tough he was as an actor, but it also showed a deeper fight that shaped his personal life. Behind the calm courtroom acts and strong screen presence was a man who had a secret he would never tell anyone in public while he was alive. As we learn more about Burr's complicated life, we see that the sacrifices he made were shaped not only by the rules of his business, but also by societal norms that didn't allow for honesty. His secret sexuality, which had been kept from the public for decades, was at the heart of this. Even though Raymond Burr never came out as gay in public, most people now agree that he was in a long-term relationship with actor-turned-wine businessman Robert Benvites. They had been together for more than 30 years and were deeply committed to each other's happiness, support, and loyalty. However, they had to keep their relationship a secret. In a time when being gay in public could get you fired from Hollywood right away, Burr's silence wasn't just a choice. It was a matter of living or dying. When it came to LGBTQ+ artists, the 1950s and 1960s were especially hard. Studios had strict rules about morals. There was a lot of power in gossip columns, and artists were expected to keep up appearances that fit heteronormative ideals. For Burr, who had just found as Perry Mason, he gained fame like never before, and people took notice of his being gay would have probably ruined the career progress he had worked so hard to make. So hard to do. There were real risks and a lot at stake. So, he made up stories about a wife who had died terribly and a son who had died of leukemia to hide the truth. Many people think that these inventions were made to avoid rumors and keep up the appearance of a straight life because they were never proven and no records ever confirmed their presence. Even though it was hard on the emotions, this trick of misleading people was sadly common among gay actors at the time. It let them work in a system that wouldn't accept them for who they really were. But behind the scenes, Burr played a straight man, but his connection with Robert Benavides was very strong. Benavides quickly became both Burr's life partner and business partner after they met in the early 1960s. They built a quiet life together by running a vineyard and investing in a number of businesses that were related to their hobbies outside of Hollywood. People they worked with and knew saw them together a lot. They often went to events, worked together, and traveled together. People who were close to Burr knew that he was close with Benvites, but the public may not have known the whole story. It wasn't a show or a news story, it was a quiet devotion that was different from the larger-than-life characters Burr played on TV. But there was a price to pay for this protection. Without meaning to, Burr added to a culture of silence that has hurt LGBTQ+ representation for generations by never coming out in public as who he really was. Some critics have said that he should not have stayed out in public because they think that his fame could have helped more people in Hollywood accept him for who he is. Some opinions, though, don't take into account how scary and dangerous things were at the time. Coming out was not a neutral thing to do. In many cases, it was suicide at work. Burr chose to protect his job and, more likely, the careers of those around him because he worked in a harsh and intolerant place. Also, Burr's quiet didn't show that he wasn't honest or self-aware. It says something about the quiet respect with which he lived his life. He never put down other people because of his fame, he never sought out trouble to get attention, and he never let the pressure of public criticism make his work less good. Instead, he had to deal with the painful duality of being admired by many people but not being able to tell them the whole truth. That paradox got stronger over time, especially as people's ideas about sexuality changed in the decades after he became famous. Burr lived via the Stonewall riots, the AIDS crisis, and the early waves of LGBTQ+ visibility in media. But, he remained outwardly silent through it all. Whether or not this changed into because of personal caution, emotional fatigue, or a preference to avoid becoming an image while he clearly wanted to behave, we can also by no means fully know. What we do recognize is that his dating with Benavides persisted the test of time, weathering now not handiest the pressures of secrecy, however also the eventual fading of Burr's mainstream spotlight. While Burr died in 1993, Benvites changed into by his side. Though prison restrictions and absence of formal popularity at the time meant that Benvites changed into now not publicly indexed as subsequent of kin, he inherited Burr's estate and keeps to supervise the Raymond Burr vineyards in California, a quiet legacy constructed on their shared lifestyles together. Within the years on the grounds that Burr's death, the truth about his sexuality has emerged extra honestly, thanks in component to biographies, interviews, and public information that painted a fuller image of who he virtually become. Even as there was by no means a formal coming out, the posthumous acknowledgement of his identity has sparked important discussions about the fee of secrecy and the emotional toll of living a double existence. Some argue that had Burr been born in an exceptional technology, he would possibly have felt freer to live openly, to percentage his happiness without fear of retribution, and to come to be a vocal endorse for trade. Others hold that his decision to stay personal become a deeply personal one, and that he have to be reputable not for what he failed to say, but for what he persisted. Why William Hopper secretly hated Raymond Burr. Building at the hidden realms of Raymond Burr's personal and professional identification, the facades he built and the roles he overcame comes a stunning twist that brings the entirety into sharper comfort. There has been one guy on set who definitely despised Raymond Burr. That man become William Hopper, who performed Paul Drake, the trusty investigator on Perry Mason. Unlike the quiet partnerships Burr maintained with Robert Benvitz, Hopper's feelings have been some distance extra volatile and revealing. Hopper and Burr's relationship started out congenially sufficient. Each had studied for the position of Perry Mason. Burr landed the lead while Hopper took the position of Drake. For a time, matters remained cordial. But as Perry Mason had become a national phenomenon, anxiety grew among the two men. Hopper reportedly resented Burr's dominating presence, his penchant for script changes, his impact over manufacturing, and the magnetic manipulate he wielded over the set. Burr became now not simply the famous person. He became the star's superstar. He formed the tone of the show and regularly directed how scenes performed out. When Hopper sought innovative enter, he observed himself overshadowed. According to a team member, Hopper by no means hated all of us greater than Burr. It wasn't an explosive animosity, but a cold, continual disdain. It's smooth to comb this apart as traditional Hollywood ego clash, however Hopper's emotions ran deeper. He felt Burr belittled his contributions and hoarded the highlight. Creative collaborations grew strained as Burr insisted on tweaking dialogue and scene route, even if that affected Hopper's function. Hopper grew silent and withdrawn, refusing to rehearse with Burr at times, warding off him in the hallways and declining to sign up for ensemble activities each time he ought to. The set, beneath its polished veneer, became a subtly demanding surroundings. Yet Hopper carried this dislike in private. There had been no public outbursts, no confrontations in the front of the forged or group. As a substitute, Hopper's contempt evolved behind the curtain in whispered conversations and bloodless silences. The honor wasn't there, remembers any other team member, highlighting the disconnect in what in any other case regarded to be a near-knit cast. What set this dynamic apart changed into its complexity. Hopper wasn't vilifying Burr as a person. He turned into rejecting the dominance Burr projected and the way that energy reconfigured the social hierarchy on set. Hopper wasn't alone in this tension. Rumors circulated a few of the group that Burr wielded relationships strategically, the usage of his superstar reputation to persuade administrators, block undesired changes, even call for reassignments whilst he felt choices strayed from his imaginative and prescient. For his part, Burr reportedly in no way engaged in direct confrontation with Hopper. He remained expert in public, generous in gesture, insisting online modifications to help Hopper, supplying backup throughout shoots, even Easter eggs like advocating for Hopper while someone was reassigned. Certainly, Hopper and Burr each stuck grief from TV manual in Burr's closing days. Burr famously complained that playing Mason dominated his life. Yet, buddies showed Raymond Burr absolutely changed into Perry Mason. Hopper, in assessment, step by step withdrew from Hollywood, turning down interviews, never reuniting with Burr after Mason resulted in 1966 and quietly fading into retirement. He died in 1970, leaving no reconciliation at the back of. So why did Hopper sense this manner? Under the floor, it is obvious why. Energy dynamics, creative control, overshadowing reputation. Yet Hopper's case highlights a larger narrative. Burr was a person described now not simplest by way of roles on screen but by way of the gravity he wielded off it. The same commanding air of mystery that made him a plausible heavy and rear window or a respected hero in Perry Mason and Ironside fashioned the way he interacted with colleagues. It wasn't simply ego. It turned into a byproduct of decades spent navigating a system that demanded dominance. Burr had started his profession TYP forged as a villain. He carried that persona into positions of innovative have an impact on. The self-assurance that helped him escape of the villain mildew turned into the identical trait that made Hopper feel erased. Yet the ones close to Burr had unique takes. Barbara Anderson, a later co-star on Ironside, remembered him as a towering presence. While you walked into a room with Raymond, it changed into an occasion. Jacqueline Scott, who visitors starred on both Perry Mason and Ironside, praised him because the consummate expert who by no means used a script or teleprompter and always confirmed respect for co-stars, along with Hopper.